Okay, Mr. O back today, and what we're going to do is work on some proofs and congruent triangles, and we're just going to be filling them in for the most part. So try to figure out what properties or what shortcuts we're going to use in these proofs. So first things first, we always know that the first reason is always given. And second, measure angle 1 equals 80. Well, that didn't come from the first, so when we look back up here, that one was also given to us. And now we need to try to figure out how did they use the two of those together. So they used the two, and they somehow got number 3. Well, from what I can tell, measure angle 1 disappeared and 80 showed up. So if measure angle 1 became 80, number 2 allowed us to do that with a substitution. And finally, how did we get this last step? Well, measure angle 2 stayed put, the 80's gone, and then somehow that 100 turned into a 20. It looks like they subtracted 80 on both sides. So that would be the subtraction property. Okay, come on down to these two examples, and we're going to talk about those congruent triangle shortcuts. So how can we prove these triangles were congruent? Well, if we look at this, these tick marks, those indicate sides, and in each one we had all 3 sets of corresponding sides marked, so therefore this would be a side, side, side. Now in example 3, it doesn't look like we have enough things marked, but if we remember back, there are 2 times we can mark the picture when it wasn't given to us. The first one is if it had the shared side, which is what we have here, and the second one is if we had vertical angles. But in our case, this is side. So this is a side, this is a side, this is an angle. So the only one that would work for that is side, angle, side. But the angle's not in between the 2 sides. So we need to check for something else. And noticing this right angle down here, across from the right angle, this would be the hypotenuse. And this side would be a leg. So we have hypotenuse leg is the shortcut that we're using. And lastly, we're going to do a triangle proof, congruent triangle proof. So reason, always the first one is given. Now the second reason, definition of midpoint, the reason we use that is because we used midpoint in the statement, and therefore it needs to go in the next reason. Usually when you see a vocabulary word, major concept like that, that's what happens. So now we need to find, like, what does a midpoint do? Midpoint's in the middle. It cuts it in half. So what are the 2 halves of xm? Well, that is xi and mi. So those being the 2 halves, we need to acknowledge that xi is congruent to mi. Number 3, we've got this midpoint. That was also given to us. It was up in the given statement. And very similar to like the previous 2, if we see this major word, major vocab, major concept, it's going to end up being in the next reason. So before we do anything, we know it's going to be a definition of midpoint. So what are the 2 halves of AO? Well, that would be AI and OI. So AI is congruent to OI. Alright, and now we've got these 2 random sets of angles are congruent to each other. Well, if we look, we first see that we've used all of our given statements, so this could not have come from a given. Therefore, we have to look in the picture and see, is there anything that we can understand as being true just by looking? And those two things are, again, shared side or vertical angles. In this case, I see the two angles across from each other, so the reason is vertical angles. So now that we've got everything marked, if we look at this, this would be a side, this is an angle, and the other one is a side. So this would be side, angle, side, proves that the triangles are congruent. Alright guys, good luck in preparing for the test, and I hope you do well.